And I want to thank Chancellor Merkel for once again hosting us, but even more for the speech that she gave this morning. As I said, I've been coming for many years, and many of you know me. So let me say at the outset, so there's no mistaking, I strongly support NATO. I believe it's the single most significant military alliance in the history of the world. And I think it's been the basis upon which we've been able to keep peace and stability for the past 70 years. And it is the heart of our collective security. It's the basis upon which the United States is able to exercise its responsibilities in other parts of the world as well. Without a stable Atlantic alliance, everything, in my view, falls apart. And I strongly, as I guess the majority of my colleagues, I don't want to speak for anyone, but my guess is they do as well, believe and support the European Union, strongly support the European Union, an antidote to excessive nationalism that twice before has torn this continent apart. The European Union is more than an economic union. It is critical to security and stability. Time and again, this community is united and stood as a safeguard against the abuse of power by any one nation, against the lapping waves of chaos that have threatened us, whether it's containing the existing danger of an unchecked nuclear arms race, or demonstrating our resolve to defeat terrorism and its rotted-out rationale of violence and fear. Our unflagging commitment to NATO's core mission has allowed us to deter aggression among nations, defeat ethnic cleansing, and bolster our shared security and civility, I might add. Today, however, our community stands at an inflection point that's providing a unique test for our solidarity and, quite frankly, for our future. Ambassador Burt and I were talking about that a moment ago. It literally we're at an inflection point. And I think everyone in this room, no matter what country you represent, understands that. At least I hope we do. Not because the challenges proliferating around the world are beyond our capacity to shape and bend for the benefit of all humankind, as we've done so often before, but not because of the autocrats who are destined, because autocrats are destined to tip the global balance in their favor and succeed in their efforts to divide us. That's not the reason. No, it's true that we're navigating new relationships with a rising China and a declining but increasingly aggressive Russia. China seeks to establish itself as a hegemon and a global power player, and Russia is using every tool at its disposal to sow discord and destabilize the democracies in Europe, including Ukraine, where it's still waging an active war today. In each case, we're seeing more than just jockeying for geopolitical advantage, in my view. There's an ideological struggle as well that's going on, a competition of systems, a competition of values. It's the kind of competition that our transatlantic community, our institutions, and NATO itself was built to address at the end of World War II. And yet in this environment, for the first time in my memory, we're being held back by hesitancy and uncertainty. I know that it's due in part to the perception that the United States itself is holding back and uncertain, that we're pulling away from the world and from our leadership responsibilities. And I know we heard a lot today about leadership, but in my experience, leadership only exists if somebody and others are with you. Leadership in the absence of people who are with you is not leadership. And so, to state the obvious, while I cannot speak today as an elected government official who's able to set policy, I can speak as a citizen. I can speak as a citizen. I can offer insight into my country. I've spent the better part of the last 2 years traveling throughout the United States of America, from Minnesota to Texas, from Boston to Birmingham. I spent time talking and listening to Americans in strongholds of liberal progressivism and in places where Democrats are a rare commodity. And I can assure you that the American people, the ultimate wellspring of power in the United States of America, remain committed to engaging the world with decency and respect. That is the prevailing view among the American people. To strengthening and advancing our hard-earned position as a leader of the free world. The vast majority of Americans are proud of that, overwhelmingly. To be sure, there's anxiety about what the future holds and caution about what our rapidly changing world means to families who are being left behind. You see the same things in your countries as well. This fourth industrial revolution is causing great anxiety, and I think is part of the reason for so much of our uncertainty. But there are answers, which I will not go into today, but the fact of the matter is the America I see is not in wholesale retreat from the interests and values that have guided us time and again to be willing to shoulder our responsibility of leadership in the 20th century. And we can do that again. We must do that again. The America I see does not wish to turn our back on the world or our allies, our closest allies. Indeed, the American people understand that it's only by working in cooperation with our friends that we are going to be able to harness the forces of a rapidly changing world, to mitigate their downsides and turn them to our collective advantage. The America I see, and I mean this sincerely, I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I think that's why I'm assuming that's why so many members of Congress are here today. The America I see cherishes a free press, democracy, the rule of law. It stands up to the aggression of dictators and against strongmen who rule by coercion, corruption, and violence. Oligarchs are the new weapon in the arsenal of these folks. The America I see values basic human decency, not snatching children from their parents or turning our back on refugees at our border. Americans know that's not right. The American people understand, please, because it makes us embarrassing. The American people know overwhelmingly that that's not right. That's not who we are. And when America leads by example at home, we extend our moral authority to lead abroad. The American people understand that as well. And so that's why there's such so much upset in America about this, what I call the struggle for America's soul. It goes beyond a single issue. It goes to who we are, what we stand for. America is led not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. And the example we're setting, well, I should stop. The America I see doesn't embrace the self-defeating tariffs and trade wars that are underway. America was built on innovation and creativity. We demand to be treated fairly, but there is no one in the world, anywhere in the world, that we're afraid to compete with, if even there's close to a level playing field. Nowhere. It's who we are, how we define ourselves. The America I see doesn't decry the science of a changing climate or deny the truth that's in front of our eyes. Americans, the mayors, I just spoke to I guess it was 800 mayors in the United States of America. Don't hold me to the number, but the National Mayors Conference. And the governors. When we walked away from Paris, they said, we're not walking away. We are going to demand we meet those standards in our cities, in our towns, in our states. They don't decry the science of a changing climate. They're busy getting to work to protect their communities against more frequent and more severe storms, the spread of wildfires and insect-borne disease, shrinking glaciers, rising sea levels, and record temperatures. And you don't have to take my word for it. There's plenty of data illustrating how widespread this feeling is among Americans. The United States should not be the world's policeman. But according to a recent Chicago Council survey, 70% of the American people say it is best for the United States to take an active part in world affairs. And that number has only gone up in the last several years. Not down, it's gone up. And the support for NATO is one of those rare issues where Republicans and Democrats, two things we can agree on, NATO and the fight against cancer. They're about the only two things right now, but a lot's going to change, I hope. But really and truly, it's the nonpartisan view. There was a vote in the House of Representatives, as the leader can tell you, as the Speaker can tell you, and overwhelmingly, 357 to 22 no votes to pass legislation that would prevent the United States from withdrawing from NATO. There's overwhelming consensus among the political elected officials in both political parties. And there's no doubt that the United States is prepared to inhabit the leadership role in the 21st century that we have so long filled on the global stage, and indeed a role that the world, I think, presumptuously say, I hope it doesn't come out the wrong way, but I believe the world still needs us to fill. And you can count on the United States to do this because a simple reason. It is overwhelmingly in our self-interest, overwhelmingly in the self-interest of the United States of America. It's beyond being noble. It's beyond being generous. It is in our self-interest, as it is in yours, I'd respectfully suggest. After World War II, we made investments in security and prosperity, the security and prosperity of our allies that returned benefits to us many times over. New markets for our products, new partners to meet complex global challenges, new allies to deter aggression, and to fight with us if, in fact, deterrence failed. And it's still true today. When terrorist organizations threaten the safety of American citizens, we're able to ensure our own security because we do not fight them alone. We fight them with you, our oldest, closest allies and partners. When outbreaks of disease ravage populations in Africa and other parts of the world and spread across borders, we contain them more effectively and efficiently because we coordinate with you. We send doctors, we send nurses, equipment, and life-saving mechanisms and medicines. When the outbreak cease, when autocrats seek to chip away at the faith in our institutions, meddle in our elections, we present a unified front to defend democratic values that are the very foundation of our security, prosperity, and our position in the world. What this is all about, what's going on, is to undermine confidence in democratic institutions. That's the game. That's what's at play when people are worried and concerned about their futures. Ladies and gentlemen, when a bully illegally takes a neighbor's territory and violates arms control treaties that have been the pillar of our common security for 3 decades, we together condemn the flagrant violation of international norms, strengthened both by our military capacity and our political unity. And I'm so proud at the coalition that was put together here in Europe to respond to the aggression of Russia in Ukraine. So this is the core of our identity, the very character of the American spirit, and our own self-interest. And I promise you, as my mother would say, this too shall pass. We will be back. We will be back. Don't have any doubt about that. Of course, America being back doesn't mean going backwards, simply returning to the policies now ill-suited to a forward march of global challenges or failing to learn from our mistakes. We need leadership that sees what's coming over the horizon, that takes steps to expand and strengthen our capacity and to meet any danger. The ideas that underpin this conference, a Europe whole, free, and at peace, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, committed to collective security, and the unquestioned pledge that an attack on one is an attack on all, which is a sacred commitment that we all have made, a sacred commitment we all have made. Those were revolutionary choices that our parents and our grandparents made. It took courage to walk away from the world as it has always been, mired in conflict, hobbled by rivalries, and take steps towards a world as it might be. It took vision to do that. Now we must once again summon the vision to make significant decisions about how to organize the world for the next 50 years and more. NATO needs to be updated and modernized to keep us strong and united. And I think that starts with investing more in our alliance so we're better equipped to take on the existing threats that we face and those on the horizon. But it won't be enough to simply strengthen NATO as it is. We need to make it better, expand our capacities to deter and meet threats, including those unique to this century. And part of that has to be looking for opportunities to cooperate with democratic partners beyond North America and beyond Europe. The free world is going to be called upon to do more than ever before, taking on the new challenges of cyberspace, addressing technologies like artificial intelligence that evolve more rapidly than everyone ever thought they would, countering new weapons of misinformation. It's going to affect all of us, every one of us. That's why, with the transatlantic partnership at its core, we need, in my view, to reach out to our partners in East Asia to fortify the collective capabilities we share. We need to integrate our friends in South America and Africa and reinvigorate the broader community of democracies than we have thus far. Just as NATO enabled the United States and Europe to lead the 20th century, a reformed, expanded institutional capacity should give us the tools we need to take on the looming challenges of the 21st century. We can do this. It is not beyond our capacity. We can once more take steps towards a world as it might be, indeed, quite frankly, as it must be, if future generations are to enjoy the dividends of peace, progress, and prosperity, a world that takes radical action to address climate change, that impacts will have on every single human being on this planet, a world that sets a level playing field for global trade, reduces inequities, that increasingly is dividing our societies and prepares for dislocations that we'll continue to see as technology changes the nature of work. A world that, with decency and dignity, joins together to address accelerating rates of migration, humanitarian crises that are not going away and are going to continue to impact all of our nations, all of our nations. I just was asked by the president of Colombia to meet with him after he met with our president. We were unable to do it because I was coming here and he was going to New York, and we had a long conversation. We should all be looking not just at Colombia and the impact that migration has as a consequence of the dissolution in my view, of Venezuela. This is a worldwide responsibility, just as what the migration patterns here in Europe are. It's not any one country's responsibility. A world that not only champions democracy in the contest of ideas, but believes on the promise, delivers on the promise of democratic governance to improve our future, rooting out corruption that strangles the rule of law and stymies democratic abilities to benefit their citizens, all while undermining democratic legitimacy. That's the world that I see of enormous possibilities, and achieving it, I think, is an urgent task that cannot wait. Our grandparents didn't wait. Why the hell should we? Why? If this is not going to be measured 100 years from now, one of those inflection points in world history, I don't know what will measure up to that definition. As I said, the world as I see it has enormous possibilities, and achieving it is an urgent task. So we have to join together and meet this call to leadership head on, to honor our commitments to one another. We can't be divided, not in our countries and not between and among our countries. Because if the strength of our transatlantic alliance falters, authoritarian powers will rush in to shape a world according to their interest, not ours, not ours. So we have to work harder to connect the work we do here in Munich and London and Brussels, Washington, the United Nations, so that the daily lives of our people and our countries are more secure. These same people who I met all across the United States, who may feel disconnected and discounted, ignored, and left behind, they still believe as I do. And I mean this, I promise you. They still believe as I do in the core values enshrined in our alliances. And they believe they are worth defending because they're smart enough to know it's in their own naked self-interest as well. I'm not going to give up on them. The United States will never give up on our allies. We need you, and I hope you think you need us. Thank you very much for listening.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. We needed to hear that speech. Thank you very much. You and I had a brief discussion about NATO behind the scenes here. Ambassador Doug Lute, your ambassador, President Obama's ambassador to NATO, and I presented a report yesterday which catalogs all the threats, from Putin to Chinese technology to what do we do in Afghanistan. We interviewed 60 people on both sides of the Atlantic. Number one threat, for the first time in 70 years, NATO does not have in the White House a strong, purposeful, active leader who appears to believe in NATO. And as we listen to people in the alliance and outside here in Europe and in our country, that was the primary threat that people identified. How do we regain our leadership role?
By reminding ourselves in the United States, and I would respectfully suggest in Europe, that there's not a single challenge that you mentioned that we can meet alone, that any one of us can meet alone. I mean, when you think about it, I mean that in a literal sense, it's not hyperbole. And each of these requires coordination, reaching out, getting some consensus to be able to act as a community, not just as a single nation. And, you know, NATO has always been the platform from which we've been able, as the United States and individual European countries and Europe united, to respond to whatever the crisis was. You know, and there's a way to deal with it. It's not always easy. You know, all of these crises affect each of our countries slightly differently, some more acutely than others, but they affect us all. And sometimes it's hard to generate a consensus. But I'm looking at John Kerry. He generated a consensus in Europe on Iran, a significant agreement, standing up to Russian aggression in Ukraine, which I spent the significant part of my career, and I see the woman who spent most of the time dealing with me, the poor devil. She had to spend an awful lot of time with me in dealing with making sure we had a consensus in Europe, which wasn't automatic initially, that we deal with Russian aggression by what we did to impose sanctions. And, you know, building a global coalition to defeat ISIS. It wasn't just, you know. So, you know, I think, Nick, it's about not being nostalgic about what we did, but understand how and why we did it. We did it through really serious coordination and disagreement and sometimes consensus, and sometimes it was really tough. But we didn't do it in public. You know, I had a dad who, I have two brothers and a sister. My dad's absolute maxim was, you're never allowed to disagree with your brother or sisters in public. You can fight like hell at home, but never in public. Well, we used to have our disagreements, and we did it among ourselves until we hammered out the approach we wanted to use. But today, because of, I think, a lack of leadership coming from the other side of the Atlantic, we find ourselves in a different place, and it's uncomfortable.
Right. Let me ask you about Russia, because you spent a lot of your time in the Senate and as vice president focused on Russia, and you've seen the ups and downs in that relationship. Right now, Putin hacked into our election. He attacked our election in 2016.
That's a fact.
That's a fact. The Dutch, French, and German elections in 2017. They're continuing their cyber operations against us. They annexed Crimea. They occupy the Donbass. They invaded Georgia. They're preying on the Baltic countries. How do we both contain a refortified NATO, contain Russia in Europe, but also we're going to have to deal with them on Iran in the future, Afghanistan, North Korea? What's the balance in our relationship with Russia?
Well, first of all, I think we have to be explicit in our response and make clear to Russia that there's a price to pay for these transgressions of international norms, and I think we have to be straightforward about it, and we have to be prepared to take certain actions. For example, we have to strengthen the alliance by which we did, NATO did it 2 meetings ago, that by establishing virtually continuous air, land, and sea presence on NATO's eastern perimeter. But it goes beyond that. I think we have to make it clear that partners outside of NATO, like Georgia and Ukraine, we have to help them in every way we can to help them become more resilient to Russia's malign influence. And, you know, I want to be explicit that I'm not concerned about Russian influence in Europe alone. I'm very concerned about Russian influence in the United States of America. It's real, it's consequential, and unchecked and unchallenged, it can cause us great, great difficulty, especially at a time when there's so much uncertainty on the economy because the world is changing so rapidly. It's so easy to demagogue the changes that are taking place by blaming the other, by getting ourselves in a situation where we divide ourselves. And so, you know, I think we have to reduce our vulnerabilities as well. You know, we could be doing a great deal more on cyber. We could be doing a great deal more both at home and abroad in dealing with everything from guaranteeing our undersea capability as well as space. I mean, there's a lot of things that we should be reacting to that time doesn't permit me to speak to. But the bottom line of all of this is, it seems to me that we have to just acknowledge straight up, Russia is a malign actor. But that doesn't mean we should not be looking for opportunities to make agreements with Russia where there's a mutual interest. And by the way, I don't think we should give up on the Russian people. I don't think we should give up on the Russian people. They have a kleptocracy that is ruling them at this point, and there's trade-offs and bargains being made by that leadership in order to try to keep the population, not let the population have much of what it wants. But you know, I think that maintaining a qualitative edge over Russia and undersea technology, space, and a whole range of other things, but not walking away from the possibility of working on strategic arms control. So we ought to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We've been able to do that in the past. Richard Burt led the effort, you know, I mean this sincerely, in terms of dealing with Russia in terms of strategic doctrine. We were able to, we had great difficulty, then it was the Soviet Union. So look, but again, I don't think we should give up on the Russian people. I think we have to keep investing in everything from student exchanges to a whole range of issues to let the Russian people know that the future lies over here, not there.
We have time for one more question. I thought one of the most interesting parts of your speech was when you said we can't go back to the old NATO. We've got to build a new NATO, and you're right. And that's maybe even to unite our East Asian allies and our NATO allies, not in a formal military alliance, but in political common cause. And here's the question. Because it seems that the Russians and Chinese have a lot of self-confidence in themselves, in the authoritarian model. A lot of people critique us, the Americans, and say, you've lost that self-confidence that Truman and Eisenhower and Kennedy and Reagan and Barack Obama had. How do you respond to that? And is that our biggest challenge?
I think, first of all, we got to stop treating NATO like a protection racket, which is the way we're doing it now. NATO is based on core values, democratic principles, it's shared values, and a commitment to each other. We used to talk about why this was important, and we have to stop taking NATO for granted. It's strange. I think as I've traveled throughout Europe, which I've done a lot over the last 12 to 15 years, there almost seems in some of your countries the notion that, well, NATO works so well, we don't have anything to be worried about. We don't have much to be worried about. Well, the truth of the matter is we have a hell of a lot to be worried about. A hell of a lot to be worried about. It's almost like we've taken for granted a system that's provided such security and stability that we don't have to do anything more with it to, in fact, continue that same stability. And so, in the interest of time, what I'd recommend everybody do here is read you and Doug Lutz's article in the Harvard, one of the Harvard publications, NATO at 70, an alliance in crisis. It's worth the read.
Mr. Vice President, thank you for your years of service to the alliance and your faith in us, and thanks for being with us today. We appreciate it.